Alright, so in this first video, our first question is going to be estimating the slope of a tangent line on the function f of x equals cube root of x. And we're going to do this by taking a couple points on the graph and join them together to make a secant line, and then find the slope of that line that we join. So our first point, which is the point we're trying to estimate this tangent line at, is at 2 comma the cube root of 2. And then our second point will be a point B, and we'll just have different x values of the point B, and we'll use these two things to kind of get a slope. So, okay, I'm going to say B is our point with an x value of 1.9 and a y value of, well, let's figure out what that is first. So to find its y value, we know it's on the graph of f of x. So it has an x value of 1.9, so I can plug in 1.9. And then I get, it's the cube root of 1.9. So this here, I could calculate what this is or estimate what this is and get some decimal expansion or whatever. But I'll actually do that later because we're trying to find the slope of the secant line created by these things. So I'll just leave that as the cube root of 1.9. And then later in our calculator, I'll just enter in a more precise answer by leaving this as the cube root of 1.9. So you don't have like any rounding errors or anything. Okay, now I'm going to use the slope formula, so I'll bring that up. Recall, I'll actually write it down a little lower so we can see it again. Recall if A is x1 comma y1 and B is x2 comma y2, then the slope between these two things is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So our first slope, I'll call it maybe m sub I, because we're in the first case here, is going to be our second y value. I like to do a second y value based on the size of x. So I like to kind of assume x1 is less than x2. So we have an x1. This part isn't super important. The order actually doesn't matter. You'll get the same answer, but I think it's good for consistency. So we know our point A is 2 comma the cube root of 2. And then, so that's A. I'll say A up here. And then our other point is 1.9. So it's got a lower x value, comma the cube root of 1.9. If you don't know whether or not the cube root of 1.9 is greater than or larger than the cube root of 2, that doesn't really matter. All we need to know is that this guy is less than this, so we have a nice order. Okay, so this will be B. Okay, so our slope is going to be then our second y value, which in this case is the cube root of 2, and our minus our first y value, which is the cube root of 1.9, divided by our first x value, which is 2, minus our our second x value, which is 2, minus our first x value, which is 1.9. So like I said, the order doesn't matter. We could put these things right. We could switch these two, and we would get the same number. But as long as you don't switch like along the diagonal, right? So if you have 2 here, you need to have 2 down here. If you have 1.9 here, you need to have 1.9 here. Otherwise, you'll get a negative number where it doesn't belong. Okay, and then now what I'm going to do is type this whole thing into the calculator to get an estimate that should be more precise than if we were to estimate what the cube root of 2 is and everything like that. So 2 to the 1/3 minus 1.9 to the 1/3 divided by 2 minus 1.9, and I get 0.213,587. That looks good enough too. Okay, so that's our slope for that one. All right, so now let's do the same thing, but we have a different x value. It's 1.99. So B is going to have an x value of 1.99. And again, its y value is going to be cube root of 1.99. And we'll keep that as a precise number. So now using our slope formula over here, our second slope is the cube root of 2 minus the cube root of 1.99 divided by 2 minus 1.99. And again, let's plug this into the calculator. We get 0.2103. That's good enough. Okay, let's do the same thing down here. So now our B value has x value 2.1, and it'll have a y value of plugging 2.1 into our function, so the cube root of 2.1. And this, I'm going to switch up the order now, because if we look at the graph, this is 2, this is 2.1, and this represents now our x1, and this represents our x2. So our third slope is our second y value, which is going to be the cube root of 2.1, minus our first y value, the cube root of 2, divided by our second x value, 2.1, minus our first x value, 2. And plug this into the calculator. And I get 0.20658. All right, one last one. Let's see, our point has an x value of 2.01. Plug that into our function, we get this cube root of 2.01. So our second y value is cube root of 2.01 minus our first y value, cube root of 2, divided by our second x value, 2.01, minus our first x value, which is 2. And again, let's plug this in the calculator. And I got 0.20963, that's an epsilon, 6, 3, and 7 something, so I'll round up 8. All right, so that's our first question. Then you'll see another question after this that'll say, what do you conjecture the slope of the actual tangent line to be? And to answer that question, you just look at what these numbers are approaching. It seems to be that these are approaching 0.21. I'm sure that's not completely accurate, but I mean, maybe I would accept that as an answer, 0.21. This is getting closer to that, and this is getting to 0.21. All right.